In tonight's pre-election segment, we turn to the race for state representative in the 14th Suffolk District. Currently represented by Angelo Scaccia, the district includes part of Rosendale and most of Hyde Park, including Reedville. Our guest is one of the Democratic challengers in the Democratic primary on September 4th. We'd like to welcome Segun Idowu. Thank you very much for being with us, Segun.
My pleasure to be back, Chris.
Tell me about your background. You're a lifelong resident of this area, basically?
So I've lived there for over a decade now, moved in when I was in high school, and I've been there ever since. I've been happy to call it home.
Now you also, since that time, you've worked in government. Start with Councilor Yancey.
Sure.
One of his aides.
Yeah, so the first president I voted for was President Barack Obama, and it was a long time ago. We don't remember that election now. But I remember, we voted, my generation voted for him expecting this massive wave of change to happen in the first 5 days of his presidency. And when that didn't happen because of a Congress that stood against him, a lot of us became cynical, and I was one of them. And so when I came back to Boston after graduating from Morehouse College in 2012, I decided that rather than remain cynical, that I would work in government to understand how it works from the inside and either confirm my suspicions or change them. And so Councilor Charles Yancey was gracious enough to give me a running start as an intern in his office that quickly grew into a full-time job as legislative aide and constituent services aide and helping people in the district.
Talk about how you see that continuing as a state rep, the nickel and dime stuff that people call you about all the time.
Well, I actually think so. A lot of people may believe that a state rep shouldn't handle things like that, and that a state rep should just send that back to the city council. In terms of the everyday matters, seeing state reps as dealing mostly with policy, I have a different opinion. I believe that a state rep should be extremely active. I've knocked on over 2,000 doors now, and I don't see why that has to stop after the campaign. The job, in my sense, in my belief, of a state rep is to go to the people, understand what's affecting not just their lives on a policy level, but also how to help them out on an everyday level.
Speaking of policy, one thing you spent a lot of time on was police body cameras.
Mm-hmm.
And when you started this, there was a lot of skepticism and leadership in the police department, City Hall. Yeah. That skepticism has vanished. So talk about what went on there.
The body cam movement is a powerful example of what grassroots activism can do and what the power of the people in this city and throughout the nation actually is and what it can achieve. When we started in August 2014, after the death of Michael Brown in Ferguson, myself and Shakia Scott, great friend from high school, decided that we weren't going to bemoan what was happening in the country anymore, that we weren't only going to yell about it, but that we were going to do something in Boston to try to prevent it from happening. And so we gathered a bunch of residents from the city of Boston who were strangers at first and are great friends now to work on this issue. And 4 years later, we understood that we had to have our act together, we had to have the facts, and we did I brought my experience from working in policy for Councilor Yancey, and others brought their experiences, and all of that working together as just a random group of people from the neighborhood. We didn't have a 501c3 status, we didn't have a budget. We did all of it just with the belief that we were doing something that mattered for our city, and because of that, the mayor has now invested $2 million in a permanent program. So now our act is to build on that progress and to spread that model throughout the city and the rest of the nation, that people really can make effective and important change happen in their community.
I imagine a lot of people in this district want more access to quality schools. What do you see yourself doing about that?
Yeah, so like I said, I've knocked on about 2,000 doors now, and one of the issues that's come up has been education and making sure that we're keeping our promise to our students, whether they be in pre-K, in elementary, middle, or high school, or even those students who have gone on to seek college degrees. And so as a public school baby, I graduated from Boston Latin Academy in 2007, and I remember every single one of my teachers. And so I feel ashamed every time I see several of my teachers who are starting GoFundMes in order to raise money to buy the necessary resources for their class. When I went back to visit my high school, seeing that the facility was still in the same disarray it was when I graduated. And so we clearly have to invest more in our public schools, but at the same time, we also have to address the effects of poverty. My thing is, I believe our public schools should be palaces. I believe teachers should have all the resources they need. But I also understand that when a student leaves a school, if they have no home to go to, if their parents don't have a stable job, if there's no food at home, that impacts their education just as much as those 8 hours that they spend in school. So I think we need to focus on the wholeness of a student rather than just the 8 hours that they're spending in school. But at the same time, investing enough in education that students who grow up in Massachusetts, who we say to them that education is the most powerful tool to be successful and contribute to the community, that we shouldn't bog them down and burden them with massive student debt. I mean, I myself am still paying off student loans, and there are students across the state of Massachusetts, particularly in my district, that are struggling right now to balance paying off their student loan debt, plus their light bill, plus their cell phone bill, and the massive transit costs that they're paying as well. So,
state senators are sort of nudging the House to help the state chip in more to education funding for school districts. I mean, they're talking about $2 billion a year, which sounds like, where are you going to get that money? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges I'm looking forward to tackling is working with colleagues in the State House and the State Senate in finding these resources. But my style of governing, as it were, is that I want to set the vision and then work towards achieving it, as opposed to the model that I see happening right now in the House, which is, well, we can't ever do it, so therefore it's impossible. I think Massachusetts has too long of a history of not only first, but in being a leader to now throw up our hands on really important issues to say that it's impossible. I don't think our history tells us that, and I think we ought to be continuing with that history in the state and tackling these issues.
This is BNN News. We're talking with Segun Idowu, candidate for a state representative in the 14th Suffolk District. Segun, if it isn't quite in the district, it's very close. There's a location where Roxbury Prep wants to move its charter school. Some people have a problem with that, but what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I am at the moment talking still with residents about the issue, and I myself don't have a fully fledged opinion, only because I'd like to hear not only what residents have to say, but also talk to the school itself and some other members who are opposed to the idea.
Another thing people want to see improved is transportation, especially those slow rides through traffic congestion on the bus. What would you like to see?
Yeah, so I live over by Reservation Road in Hyde Park, which is kind of near Reedville. And, for us, transportation is a huge issue over there. We have no access to the subway except for the number 32 bus or 33. And so the route is extremely troublesome and burdensome for a lot of people who have to go to work or go to school. So our access is either through the commuter rail station or the bus. And for the commuter rail, at least the Reedville station and other stations in the district, including Roslindale, wind up paying, because they fall outside of the zone 1A, they're paying $6.25 versus those on the Fairmount line paying $2.25. I believe in fair equity. I think everyone should be paying the same rate at that reduced price of $2.25, because folks are paying hundreds of dollars per month for a monthly pass, as opposed to a neighbor that may live down the street closer to a station like that. And so I'm about moving that into the zone, as well as studying what rapid transit on the commuter rail in Boston would look like to get people where they have to go faster. And then, building on the success that our city council just achieved, Councilor Wu, particularly in Rosendale, in introducing bus-only lanes in Rosendale to Forest Hills. Now, I know that we can't, it would be very difficult to do that along the whole stretch of Hyde Park Ave, but I think we have to look into alternative models like that, because right now, on the 32 bus that I take every morning, I'm spending 45 minutes on the way to Forest Hills, and then another 20 minutes waiting for the train or another bus. And so, like I said, it's detrimental to those who rely on this part of public transportation to get to work or school.
I know Hyde Park has a lot more of a suburban quality with less density, but you still have some multi-unit buildings where people are worried about displacement, the rising cost of rents. What would you like to do about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's. I know that the focus in the city right now is about stabilizing rents, but it's both and for me. It's both focusing on stabilizing rents as well as finding ways to protect homeowners. Because what we're also finding, is particularly in places like Roxbury or Mattapan, and now moving out to Rosendale and Hyde Park and West Roxbury, which is part of the district as well, is that people are building millions of dollar luxury condos, which is also increasing people's taxes and moving them out of the city as well. And so you have homeowners who have been here for 30, 40, 50 years, and entire generations who are now finding it difficult to stay in the same neighborhood because of the increasing cost of housing. And so for me, it's about making sure that we have an advocate at the State House who's fighting for Boston. I think a perfect example is how the Jim Brooks Stabilization Act died in committee in the House, something that only sought to collect data on the issue so we would understand where to target our policies and practices that we're trying to put into shape. And so I would be focused on introducing the original language, which had no fault eviction, just cause eviction in there. To protect renters, make sure they have the resources they need to understand that process and prevent being displaced, as well as introducing measures that protect homeowners from being pushed out of their neighborhood.
There's a possibility that the U.S. Supreme Court might change the landscape around abortion rights dramatically, and that means maybe an old state law might come back into force here in Massachusetts. There's an attempt to keep that from happening. Do you support that?
I absolutely do. You know, sometimes people think that on the state level or even the city level that much can't be done to prevent what's happening from that we see coming out of D.C. But this is an issue, as well as with unions and immigration, where the state can play a critical role in protecting our residents. There's an act called the Nasty Women Act, which is seeking to abolish those unjust laws. And I am absolutely in full support of passing that act and making sure that we are codifying in our laws and our practices the right of women to access healthy options for themselves. And so, you know, unfortunately, the representative who is in office now is a very conservative Democrat and does not have a good track record on issues pertaining to women's health.
One other concern in this district, and you've got a lot of wooded areas, is would it be nice to have another place where people could let their dogs run around?
Absolutely.
What about that?
You know, this is actually another big issue in the district, and I absolutely fully support having a dog park in Hyde Park. Hyde Park is actually one of the only neighborhoods in the city that's left that has no access to a dog park, and it creates really unsafe conditions in the parks that we do have, where people have nowhere that's dedicated to walking their dogs, and so the dogs are being let go in places where children are playing. And while I know that owners are taking very good care of their dogs and training them well, it creates a potentially dangerous situation. And so I am not I don't really understand what the pushback has been from our current state rep, who is against having a dog park, but absolutely am for that. The community has gone through a long process in citing where a dog park should be and talking about how to make something like that happen. And I think that our representative ought to honor the will of the people in bringing about that change.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Segun Idowu, candidate for state representative in the 14th Suffolk District. In a moment, updating Shakespeare for the age of Trump. We'll hear about a new production by Hub Theater Company of Boston.